staff or don't know where I am. And
Now calling the Social and Economic Adjustment Commission to order.
Okay, Nicole's not going to be here.
Please take the roll.
Okay. Member Bauer?
Present.
Member Marks?
Here.
Member Darrow is not here. Member Grossman?
here?
And Chair Deal.
Here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is go over the minutes. Does anybody have any questions or changes to the minutes? Nobody?
I move we accept the minutes.
Okay, I second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Not in favor? Okay. Minutes pass. Okay, well, is there anybody from the public who wishes to bring up a topic that's not on the agenda? Would you like
Your
to?
moments.
Right.
Would you
Come
like to?
now, speak now.
Okay, let's, everybody,
No, the city council meeting is next week.
It's okay.
Not even the right meeting. Doing
okay.
well with the public.
Seeing as how there's nobody here from the public, are there any announcements from committee members?
It's May, International May Day today, so
Okay.
Also, the city will be giving out free compost for Albany residents at Memorial Park this Saturday, so
Free what?
feel free. Compost
whereabouts, Tara?
at Memorial Park.
I know, but do you know where? Is it where near the gardens are?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And it's in conjunction with the Friends of Albany Parks cleanup going on around there too, so.
Okay, that's a good thing.
At San Carlos?
It's, yeah, Memorial Park, so it'll be Portland and like Carmel.
Oh, Portland and Carmel, okay.
I need it.
Are there any announcements from the staff?
Oh, anything.
No announcements.
Okay, no presentations. So we can jump right into our agenda of unfinished business. And the first item is inclusivity.
Sure, yeah, I'll start. So we talked last time about where to go from here in terms of inclusivity. And we talked about potential options, including hosting one of our meetings at a different, maybe more inviting location like the library, going straight to council with a recommendation, and a couple other things. And so Bart and I talked a little bit over this month, and we decided that we don't want to go straight to council with a recommendation because we feel like we can't effectively do that until we have a better idea from the community who's affected by these issues about what they want. But then we also think that just hosting a public meeting isn't going to be super effective either because city meetings traditionally have kind of a low turnout. But Bart brought up the point that at the council meeting, if you guys were there or saw it, when they were talking about ranked choice voting, council had instructed staff to work on plans for a survey related to whether or not people feel like disenfranchised in the city and their feelings about that. And so we had the idea that maybe we could write a letter to council and ask them to extend that survey to kind of include a broader range of questions related to issues involving inclusivity and how people feel related to that in the city. And then after that survey comes in, if they decide to do that, we could maybe host a community workshop to share and discuss the results. So our idea was that going from here, we would draft a letter to council with that recommendation, but we wanted to talk to you guys first about what you thought about that. And if you want to add anything, go ahead.
Isabel, has anything moved forward on that plan?
I don't think it's come back to council yet.
Okay, is
So it's still
somebody
on
in the staff working on it?
I'm not aware. Not-
Okay.
Not at this time, no.
Yeah, because it seemed, listening, by the way, I did get a chance to watch the video from last month, so I got up to speed on the discussion. The question that the council was talking about really was very germane to what we're talking about. That is, are there groups in the community who feel that they don't have a voice politically and who haven't been participating politically, and why is that? It's very connected to our concerns about, do people feel included? If not, how and when, do they experience a sense of exclusion? And so it would, it wouldn't add a whole lot, I think, to that kind of survey to add those kinds of questions. And it would give us a base to begin a discussion. And if we could call a community meeting at that point saying, here are the results that came in from the survey, and we'd like to present them to you and discuss them with you, I think there'd be a lot more interest than, just come and talk to us about how you feel like you can't talk to us.
Right.
So it seemed like a good preliminary step, and if we jumped on that thing which has already been mandated by council, it wouldn't really cost very much, if anything.
Yeah, and because when we were talking to Barbara and Isabel about what to do in this situation, the idea that council responds particularly well to numbers and hard data from around the city was brought up a few times, and so I think it would be good to be able to combine that with having sort of like a public meeting and letting people share their experiences and the experiences of the communities that they represent, and to use those two sort of together to form kind of a plan.
Margie, any thoughts on this?
I think that's a great idea. I think you're going in the right way.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, too. And I think it's something, as you mentioned, the city council would respond to. I would try to keep it relatively simple, not like a really long survey, like maybe 5 questions at the most. And also inform the respondents about the purpose of the survey, so they understand that it's going to be for the basis of a follow-up.
My understanding was the council's basically asking for a consultant to do that survey, or, somebody who's an expert in doing that kind of thing. So I think they'd understand what we have in mind, and I think you're right, it wouldn't need to be voluminous. It just might be some additional questions. They might, in fact, I don't know what the survey is they're thinking, that this person would think about, but it might already include some of those issues.
Well, involving them in the political process, to me, was always the number one goal.
Right.
My question is just if the survey is being drafted by staff or whoever, like, would we be able to give input or like suggestions on those kinds of questions before it's just sort of handed over?
Well, that's what we'd be asking for in a letter, is the ability to do that.
Right.
To work with whoever the consultant is on identifying those questions. So if everyone's in agreement, we could draft a letter.
Yeah.
Well, you do want to state a motion?
Oh,
Make a
all
motion?
right, yes, that's a good idea. So I move that we draft a letter to council requesting inclusion of, well, I don't want to use inclusion twice, requesting the opportunity to work with whoever is going to do the survey on voting in Albany to include questions related to inclusivity.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
What about public?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that's, unfortunately, you guys got to remind me about that.
Okay.
So I really
We do
try
want to
to
hear
skip
from the
ahead.
public.
I don't know if the.
Anybody from the public interested in
Inclusivity.
responding to our inclusivity thoughts?
No.
Mr. Campbell? Mr. Papalia? Okay,
No.
all right. Okay, all right, should we? Okay, So I think we can say that we passed the idea. And,
And I'll work with Tara to
Work on
draft
it.
a letter
okay,
to have for the next meeting,
all right, okay.
because I don't think it's going to move faster than that. anyway.
Right.
Right. And then we'll have a chance to see it before it goes
Yeah.
out. Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay, our next item is a little bit of an update on the rent review ordinance. And now I see that Margie got a notice that there's going to be like another workshop, so to speak, at the May 7th meeting. And I think that maybe that's a good idea because, you know, there were 4 issues that we brought up to raise to the city council at their last meeting where they discussed the draft ordinance. And 2 of the issues I felt were addressed
Have you seen this?
relatively well. Margie?
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Never mind.
But the 4 issues were the trigger, the effectiveness period, the just cause for eviction, and what was my other one? Okay.
It was the base rent and
Right, the base
effective in
rent.
150 days, I
Okay.
think.
Thank you. And the base rent, I felt was addressed adequately. They voted to include the pass-through and ancillary cost that the landlord has control over. And then the trigger had originally been at 7%, and they voted to set it at 5%. So that left just cause for eviction, and I want to bring that up again, and now we have the opportunity to, and there were, you know, the concerns are that retaliatory eviction clause in the ordinance doesn't really address the possibility for the property owner to circumvent rent review by just out and out evicting the tenant so that they don't have an opportunity to request rent review. The retaliatory only goes into effect if the landlord says, I'm going to raise your rent. The tenant says, I'm going to ask for rent review. And then the landlord says, well, I'm going to evict you then, which of course is, of course, these 2 landlords here would never do anything like that. But it's against the state law as well as being in our ordinance. But I want to press the importance of just cause for eviction. And then the other item, the effective date, 150 days, is too long. I did get some feedback from various persons and who said that generally it doesn't take that long to get an ordinance to be in place so that it can be up and running. That's 5 months. And that, again, it gives the property owners an opportunity to raise the rent without the tenants having any chance of calling on a rent review. And we were looking at the cities of Fremont, Union City, and San Leandro as kind of like models for our rent review program. And I called and personally talked to staff at the city of Fremont and Union City who work on rent review and asked them what was their effective period. City of Fremont told me it was 90 days. Union City said 30 days with a 30-day eviction protection, although it would take another 60 days for the rent review to go into effect. During that period, there would be eviction protection. And San Leandro, I went online, and their effective period was 30 days. So the 150 days is far too long. and needs to be shortened. One of the arguments that somebody presented is that, well, the trend in rent increases has lessened, it's not accelerating the way it was. But we don't know what's going to happen in 5 months. We don't know what's going to happen in a month from now. That's just kind of based on a sense of what's been happening, but certainly not on any hard data. So my question to the commission is, do you have additional concerns about there not being just cause for eviction, additional concerns about the effective date that I can present at the next workshop?
Well, my question would be, just, I hadn't heard about the workshop until today, but is this modeled like the last one was? Like, was there a specific reason why the workshop was called? Like, is there an agenda? Do you know?
Well, it's an opportunity for the council to hear more from the public.
So it's just sort of
So
extended.
no action will be taken. It'll be, but council may give direction at the end of the work session. But it's basically an opportunity for the public to provide more information.
So what prompted it? Did they get a lot more
Yeah,
input?
the
from
council received more feedback after the last council meeting when the rent review work session happened, and as a result of that, decided to provide another meeting.
And so
Can I just stay on that for a second? When did they decide to do that? It wasn't in the meeting.
No, it was not at the meeting. It was basically the mayor. It's the mayor.
So the mayor
Yes.
decided, it's not a council decision.
Right, exactly. Yeah, mayor, yeah.
okay,
Sorry.
that's all right. Okay, well, go ahead. Did you
that's
have
what I
any
was-
additional ideas? Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, am I confused here, or didn't at least a couple of those communities during that period before the ordinance took effect have a moratorium on rent increases?
I'm not sure about that.
At least
either
one of them,
those.
but I don't remember which one.
I think San Leandro did, because I remember
Yeah, I think it
discussing that.
was San
Yeah.
Leandro.
The city of
them
Alameda
did.
had a moratorium, I know that.
Right,
Yeah.
Alameda was different, though.
Yeah.
But the Union City had that 30-day eviction protection.
Yeah, well, there, I guess, different ways of achieving the goal of
Right.
preventing any kind of action during that period while the ordinance is beginning.
Right.
So it seems to me there needs to be some protection. There are a variety of ways of doing that.
Well,
Okay, I don't have additional. That
okay,
was-
all right. Anybody have any additional for just
I think this is
cause
good.
or effective date?
Yeah, I think this is pretty comprehensive.
Okay, all right. Does the public want to speak to either of these?
Francesco Papalia, live in Albany. You expressed concern about the effective in 150 days, and you cited that other cities have a shorter period. And yet, and also, I would like to note that those other cities had a 7% or a 10% trigger. So I feel that there's a relationship between the two, and I think if you're going to, take what another district uses for a standard for the effectiveness, you would want to consider that, well, if the trigger is 7%, then you could have a shorter period of time for it to become effective. So there's a relationship between the two. I don't think it's fair to just take one and say, oh, we like this in this ordinance, but we want it the other way when it comes to the trigger. And regarding the trigger, I keep hearing people talk about the trigger and saying, like, this says a 7% increase over a 5-year period would create a 2,800 two-bedroom unit to become 3,925. This is not a real-world mathematical problem where you can just say, oh, we're going to just raise the rent that amount. First of all, $2,800 is extremely high for a two-bedroom unit, and it's not an average one. So where you might find something happening if something is priced below market, say two-bedroom at $1,800 or $1,600, which exists, and then the landlord says, well, we want to bring it up to market, so you could take that number. But don't pick the highest number and then say, oh, because remember, a rent increase can only be applied and be successful if it is the market rent. You can't just raise the rent from $2,800 to $39 to almost $4,000 and just say, I'm going to get it. So I keep hearing this one mathematical extrapolation that just is not realistic. It's just a way to manipulate numbers to create a shocking number rather than finding, here's a specific example and that is in the real world. I think the other thing is that I keep seeing you're wanting to have a trigger of 2%. And once again, I want to repeat that 2.2% is the number that is used in cities that have rent control. And it is basically saying to a property owner, you can only raise the rent based on inflation, which means you'll be making no more money, that things don't go up in value. We're going to keep your property values down to existing value while everything else is appreciating, because if inflation is 2.25%, that means their insurance is going up, their other expenses, the cost of maintenance goes up. And let me tell you, the cost of maintenance and things like that in the Bay Area go up much higher than the 2.2%. And here's the reason why. Because the housing costs have been going up, and therefore the people who work and do the maintenance have to make more money. So they charge more money to do a roof. They charge more money to do a kitchen remodel. They charge more money to mow and landscape. I can attest to that as a realistic example of how expenses extend far beyond a 2.2% appreciation from year to year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment?
First,
Do you want to say something?
yeah, let's,
I just want to remind us that we're not talking about rent control. So we're not saying somebody can or cannot raise their rent. The only thing that can happen in the ordinance we're suggesting and the council is working on is if rent is raised past a certain percentage, there is then available a voluntary mediation process, which is not binding on the landlord. So, I mean, it's not like, cities where there's an absolute limit on how much you can raise. You can ask for any increase you want to ask. It may be then that if the increase is high, you need to justify it. It seems to me you've already identified what the grounds would be for justification.
also, I would like to point out that 2,800 number comes from the property owner's website.
It's from a realtor's
A
website.
realtor's website. We did, and that's actually $300 less a month than what the county of Alameda estimated is the mean rent for a two-bedroom in Albany. As far as like the 5-year, 40% increase not being realistic, it is the worst case. But that's what we're, please sit down, I'm not done.
I'll wait till you're finished. I have an opportunity to say something.
Bart asked you if you wanted to.
No, it's all right. But just let her
Okay,
finish.
I
and
need
then,
you
yeah.
to sit down.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And so it is the worst case, but part of the idea of having some type of a rent review ordinance is to prevent the worst case. Tara, did you have anything?
We're still on,
Okay,
We're on
I'd
public.
like to assert that I'm the chair, and I'm,
sorry.
okay. Please, Mr. Campbell, go ahead now.
Yeah, I know that everybody says this is not rent control, and I concede to you that, in fact, rent review is not rent control. Rent review exists right now. If you give a resident a notice of rent increase, and they say, well, that's more than I can afford, then you're going to talk with them. You're not going to evict them because they say, well, I can't afford that. If you evict them, you're cutting off your nose to spite your own face. I don't know if you know what it costs to evict somebody. I don't. I understand that it costs tens of thousands of dollars to get somebody out of a rental because they go to Oakland courthouse where they handle evictions, and there are people lined up outside of the room that say, come here, I'll let you stay in your house for 6 months for nothing. And those people say, this is how we're going to do it. They get before the judge and they say various and sundry things, but they get a delay on the eviction for at least 6 months. Now, during that 6 months, the owner of the property is losing the rent. You say it's $2,800 a month. So you figure that for 6 months, what is that? 3, 6, 18, that's about $16,000, something like that. That's not cheap. So a landlord's not going to evict somebody just because the tenant says, oh, that's too much, and I don't want to pay that. The landlord is going to say, well, wait a minute, let's figure out why it's too much for you and why we can make an adjustment. I mean, they're not stupid, the property owners. They want to keep their good tenants in the property. If they have a bad tenant, they don't care. They want to get rid of the bad tenant. Usually the bad tenants go on their own. But the property owner doesn't want to take a $15,000 to $20,000 hit just to try to get somebody out because they won't take a 5% increase or a 10% increase or whatever. So I think that's all I want to say on that. You keep talking about eviction control. Eviction control is rent control, period. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Tara?
I was going to say, at least to respond to the first part, I think that is a valid point, but I think the idea is that rather than just having that conversation between those two parties, that we'd have an independent mediator there to kind of evaluate the situation from an independent standpoint. But
I just wanted to say a couple of things. One thing is, I've heard that evictions are very difficult, whether there's rent control, rent review, or nothing. It's just the nature of the beast, that it's very hard to do. I actually want to go with Ian to check it out, to see. He talked about going to the court, and there's 2 lines, one if you have rent control and one if you don't. And it's to help you make it through these eviction process. So it's very hard. And so I don't know that it'll make a difference if we have rent review in Albany or not as far as evictions go. It's just hard to do it anyway. The other thing I would say is I checked with the city of Berkeley, their rent board, and asked them, because people have to register their rental units. If they had a decrease in rental units because of the rent control program in Berkeley, and he told me no, as a matter of fact, they're growing. People are building buildings in Berkeley that are covered by rent control, new buildings, so it hasn't stopped new buildings and it hasn't decreased. What? Oh, okay. Right, but it's voluntary. I mean, for that portion of it. But anyway, I think. And I think you're a decent landlord. I know that. I know in my heart, I know you are a good landlord. So I think we just can't judge everything based upon you or a good landlord. Unfortunately, there are some bad landlords out there, and I want every landlord. One of the things I really wished we could have done was more protections for landlords and tenants. if a landlord had an extraordinary expense. I think, what can we do to help them through that? I mean, they need, the same way as if a tenant had an extraordinary, whatever, but we just didn't come to that. I mean, I don't understand the reason for the workshop, really. I thought it had been covered, and I don't know that more input's going to change.
Yeah, and the work session was also suggested by the city attorney.
Okay.
For the council to get more information. And I'd like also to add a comment about the effective date. The cities that you're comparing Albany to are cities that either had already, a rent review ordinance in place, so they had staff in place ready to address the changes. I'm talking about San Leandro. And when I did speak to Union City, they already had hired a full-time person to work on rent review. So these are things that are not in place currently with the city of Albany. So that's one of the reasons why we're asking for more time, is to allow the city to create a program and just put the staff in place to be able to run the program efficiently once it's implemented.
Bart, you had something?
I was just going to say that what we're just talking about now are things that we might say to the council, but really this is no longer our issue. I mean, it's moved past us now. We're not making any decisions about this. It's gone to council. In terms of how those points you've mentioned get raised, I'm not sure what the process would be. Because,
Well, did you watch the city council meeting that we had on?
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking it would be the same process, correct?
they would
Yes.
call on SEJC?
They'll call on the public, and we'll get up and speak.
So we would be just speaking as part of the public. So,
Right, yeah.
yeah, so we're not, at this point, as a committee, we're basically, we've made our recommendations. And the council has to make its own decisions at this point.
But we are,
We can
as part of the public,
participate, yeah,
and we can identify ourselves.
Right.
As part of the commission. Well, I've have a couple of things to respond to Mr. Campbell. Now, we put together a lot of different tables about different ordinances, either model ones or ones that were already in place, that had just cause for eviction. And part of what we did was we listed a lot of property owner protections, like what would be some of the reasons for just cause eviction? Somebody not paying their rent, somebody damaging property, somebody becoming a nuisance so that other tenants don't want to live in the place anymore. So it would be to the landlord's advantage in reality, because then they have something that they can use to kind of, as a hammer with the tenants, to prevent that type of behavior. So you can try to look at it that way too. And as Marge said, it'd be nice if we could base this on your temperament, your perception, but there are people who will take advantage, and that's why, part of why we are where we are. Then as far as like the effective date, so if we extend have this long effective date, then I think that we need to have some protections for the tenants, as Union City did. So that is something, and I haven't thought all the way through, but Union City did have that 30-day eviction protection. There may be other protections, and I will think about that more for the meeting. So what I want to know is, does the commission want Margie and I to represent them at the city council meeting? If so, then we can introduce ourselves as representing the concerns of the commission.
I think we already selected you to be our representative.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say you're the
So-
subcommittee, so that makes
all right.
sense to me.
So we need
I
to,
don't know, what is the law regarding that?
Yeah.
Do we go as individual public members, Isabel, or? I mean, what does the law say? Do you know?
Well, usually you do state whether or not you're speaking for yourself or on behalf of the committee.
Right,
If we made like a motion or something.
yeah. But there's the Brown Act, but as long as there's not three of us, correct? There can be two of us, or can there
Right.
just be?
Well, anybody
But it could be at a
can,
meeting.
can be at the meeting,
I know.
yes.
But as far as representing the commission, can there be two of us representing the commission, but not three or only?
But as a subcommittee,
Right,
yes.
okay. All right. You wanna make a motion?
Yeah, sure. I move to nominate Kathy and Margie to represent the SEJC at the city council workshop regarding the rent review ordinance.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Wait, public comment.
Oops. Do we do public comment again?
Yes, on motions, don't you do public comment?
You can, sure. It's up to you. Really.
Do you want to say anything else? Or did you get to say your piece? Okay. Francesco? Okay, I think they're all right. Okay, so our next item is ballot measure to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. And I'm sure probably everybody's heard that this is, I'm quite certain they've already got enough signatures to get it on the ballot. And I sent with the package this little history that Wikipedia put together. I thought it was pretty neutral, didn't really push one position or another, but it just talked about all the different activities that have been taking place through the state legislature and different cities since the 70s. I guess I should have known that the state was involved that far back since the cities had started to enact rent control. So I know this doesn't apply to us directly, but I do think that there's no way for it to not somehow influence our lives, having Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco and several other cities in the Bay Area already having some kind of rent control. Kind of what I'm proposing is that we might have some kind of public service presentation by a neutral party or an opponent and proponent of this at one of our meetings, just to inform people. If people don't want to put their energy in, I would arrange it. I have some contacts. But, any feedback on that idea? If you got a chance to read this, you see that Jerry Brown was involved when he was governor the first time and when he was governor the second time. The first time he was in favor of
Yeah, I saw that. That's funny.
he was supporting the renters, and then the second time he was supporting the property
Are you
owners.
suggesting that for the commission or for like a public forum?
Just for the
event?
commission,
Okay, and like what action would we be, would this be informative or?
just informative.
Okay.
Anybody else have any thoughts about it? Any problems anybody sees with that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if there's any precedent for a commission doing something like that, to pick one item on the ballot and bring it in for discussion. I mean, there are multiple items on the ballot that have a bearing on social and economic justice.
I mean, I think it would make sense if we had a specific action or goal tied to having a presentation of that sort, but, I mean, I don't know, yeah.
Well, it would be informative. I don't think.
I
we
mean, anyone can
take-
organize a presentation, you know,
Right.
but whether it should, ought to be an official action of a commission, I have questions about that.
And I would invite the commission to look at their work plan, which I don't think includes
Yeah.
the Costa Hawkins.
Oh, okay, okay. So maybe not.
Yeah, I would encourage you to organize something of that nature.
But not through,
Just as a
not
citizen, yeah,
through the
Yeah.
commission.
yeah.
I'd second that.
Okay, all right. All right, so no official commission action on this. Okay, so next is,
Public comment.
I'm sorry, I always forget. Thanks for reminding me. I'm very focused on looking at the agenda.
Francesco Papalia, Albany resident. The Costa-Hawkins Act, if it is repealed, will lead to probably some unintended consequences. Two of the elements that it would be repealing is the exemption for single-family homes and condominiums from rent control throughout the state. If this happens, it would lead to an unexpected consequence of a vast reduction in the availability of single-family homes and condominiums as rentals, because property owners of those that are renting them will decide they'll be incentivized to sell the unit and to sell it to someone who is going to own or occupy it. This is just the way things will be for a property owner who sees on the horizon the potential for rent control of the single-family home or condo. And people who own those are generally risk-averse. They want a simple, safe thing, and the idea of rent control, they'll just say, it's just easier, let's just sell it and move on. The other thing that if it removes the protections for new construction, if a developer or anyone with capital decides that they want to build new construction, they will look at the state of California and the individual areas that seem to be pushing towards rent control, like around the Bay Area here, and they'll say, we don't want to get involved in this. We will take our capital and invest it in a different area, because they just will say, we don't want to spend our money developing things and then have the government telling us how much we can rent it for. So it will have an unintended consequence of limiting the numbers of new units. People are saying, oh, well, they'll exemption for 12 years. That still won't work. To some, it will. To some, they might plod forward with it. But the idea is that this is just a bad, bad idea. The idea of vacancy decontrol is a different concept and is much more complicated to discuss. And I think there actually would be a good idea to have a forum about this. We'd get some very, very interesting ideas. But I'd like to repeat that the the removal of the protections on single-family homes and condominiums will have an adverse effect on the availability of rental houses for the public. And so it's just a bad, bad idea. Thank you.
Just wanted to expand, Peter Campbell, Albany resident. I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Francesco just said. Costa-Hawkins protects new construction as well against rent control. And I'm not privy to the exact numbers, but I have heard that in Berkeley, which has very strict rent control, from the time they passed rent control until Costa-Hawkins came into effect, constructed 10, that's 1 and a 0, 10 new units. I don't know if that's true. I haven't fact-checked that, but that's what I've heard from what I consider to be a reliable source. Now, since Costa-Hawkins was passed, you've seen hundreds of units being built in Berkeley. And the main reason, I believe, is because they're not affected by rent control. They're exempt from rent control. Now, if those facts are in fact true, and I have no reason to doubt them, but if they're in fact true, the construction of additional rental housing will stop if Costa-Hawkins is repealed. And I don't quite understand why we're talking about Costa-Hawkins here, because as Ms. Leduc stated, it's not really on your work plan for this year. But it's something that's coming up, and we need to be aware of it. And I think we need to look at all sides of it, and I think one side that's not being given enough due is the effect it would have on new construction, which is the only way to get additional housing, and the effect on existing single-family residences that are being rented.
Thank you. Commission, any comments?
No.
Okay. Now we are going to move on to Albany Project Hope. And did everybody get a chance to go over the report? I guess this is a report to the city council. So will Project Hope get this feedback that we provide?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So will you transfer it to?
I do.
Okay, okay. So, well, I went over this, and I've read the other ones that we've gotten throughout the quarters, and it looks to me like the text they use is kind of standard, and then they change the numbers, and so you can't quite tell, if they're making progress based on this, but the attachments, the charts, are somewhat telling, and it sounds to me like the reports that they provided to us in person, where there's a lot of effort that they put out constantly, and then they get little trickles of results. And I'm assuming it's not because they're not working hard, but it probably has to do with how well these people respond to them, and possibly the resources. So I noticed there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of numbers on discussion, very little response to the availability of transporting people. There's also a lot of life skills assistance, a lot of home visits. There's not provided financial assistance for move-in 000. There was 1 month, October 2017, and March 2018. So that kind of signals there's no resources.
Right.
And then the other attachment, the other chart, similar kind of take on that. There's a lot of outreach, 68 contacts already this year. Number of housing case plans performed, 30. But new clients housed, 2 year to date. We're almost halfway through the year. So to me, that's kind of sad, actually. And again, I think Bart had mentioned to me just in the conversation we had that there wasn't any housing available anymore for the homeless. I did notice, though, that the last time I was on BART approaching MacArthur, that they were putting up those tiny houses in the BART parking lot. I think they had about 10 of them. It was in front of the little tent encampment.
It's transitional house,
Is that transitional house?
yeah, city house.
Are they those tough sheds
Yeah.
that they're talking
They're
about?
green.
Yeah, they ordered a certain number of them.
Yeah, Libby Schaff was on, I think KQED last Sunday talking about that. So apparently there's some money for that, but I don't know if we need that here in Albany, 'cause I haven't really been tracking the homeless situation in Albany as much as you probably have. But
Can I comment a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds, because obviously I want assistance to be available for people, but that conversation was in part related to a meeting that Isabel and I had had with Berkeley Mental Health. And they indicated at that time, and they included Berkeley Food and Housing Project, and I'd like to get a reading of this from them, but they said that basically they weren't trying to house people anymore, that there was no housing available, there was nothing that they could do at that point, that all the transitional housing is full.
And that's the green, those little
Well,
green.
those are new, but the
Oh.
point is that if your transitional housing is full because there's no place for people to transition to, then you've got nothing to offer people. So, I mean, I'm not sure what that means. There is support being given to that group of people who are now housed, and I think that makes sense. Some of them seem to have moved out of that phase, and that seems to be appropriate. It's been a while. And there needs to be support for people, but what can anyone do if there's absolutely no housing? It's just, it really confounds me in terms, and I would like to know what Berkeley Food and Housing Project is doing and thinking about that. And I was also curious as to how ultimately this piece of the program fits with the hub, which we're also involved in, and which also provides these services, and should, should the city be paying for that, or is that part of what the hub should, be providing? So, looking down the road, are we going to have to continue to provide this service in a detached way?
It's not detached. So, the City of Albany program focuses on people who are homeless in Albany, and it's funded with City of Albany General Fund and CDBG Fund. And the hub, which is the Coordinated Entry System program for Emeryville, Berkeley, and Albany, is funded by the county. So through that, the City of Albany does receive some benefits with added, outreach staff, and then a coordination for services and a coordination of all the people who are homeless in Albany. So there's a list being created of all the people who are homeless in Albany and Emeryville and Berkeley. So it's a regional list, and people are put on the list and they're assessed. And based on that assessment, they are prioritized on the list. So everybody who is homeless in Albany gets on that list and has access, when available, to the resources of the hub. But in the meantime, and in addition to, the City of Albany does provide services, funds for services specifically for Albany, which are basically the outreach and engagement, the housing piece, the housing maintenance, case management, and the goal is to continue to do that, but also coordinate with the services available at the hub to basically complement. So basically, the City of Albany to augment the services provided. So for Albany homeless. But the main thing, I think the main difference, is that through the county hub, people get access to more long-term subsidies and transitional housing and supportive services, which we cannot provide because it's too expensive. But there is a long list. There's a long wait list for those services. But those people are put on that list if they qualify. And in the meantime, the City of Albany program continues to provide the services on the streets. And if we, we do have some rapid rehousing funds that can help to move people into shared housing, or, if they find an apartment that they can afford, or housing situations that they can afford, then that money can be used to subsidize the rent for a while, help with deposits, utilities, and all that. So it's it's more of a coordinated approach
So,
moving forward. And right now, it's sort of coming together after, the hub opened more than a year ago, but it was just for the city of Berkeley, and then the county hub opened in the fall. And it's just now that we're seeing that all the systems are starting to build procedures and that really are starting to make a difference or come together. It takes a long time.
sure.
Yeah.
Is the fact that we're providing these services in Albany, does that have any impact on people's priority
No.
for county services?
No, the priority is based on being chronically homeless. So we do not impact their, no.
No, so they wouldn't not be helped there because we're helping them here.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, it's to see sort of people at Berkeley Mental Health and others in the community basically throwing up their hands.
Right. Well, we're not
It's
going to.
heartbreaking.
Yeah, and Albany's not going to be any different, right? BFHB is not going to do any miracles. We're not going, and that's why you see that the numbers are so low for housing, because it's been very challenging. And housing one person used to, a subsidy for one person used to be maybe, $500 a month, and now it's $800 a month. So, and we want to house people and keep them in housing and subsidize them as long as they. I mean, that's been the philosophy behind the program, is to help people get independent and self-sufficient. But it's very costly to do that right now, to house people.
I wonder, looking at the numbers in the first chart, Kathy, you brought up that the numbers for like discussions of housing benefits, et cetera, are a lot higher than kind of concrete services, especially like transportation. And I wonder, is that because those services aren't needed as much, or is it because the resources to increase those numbers are not as available as we'd like?
Well, transporting a client takes a lot longer than a discussion. So you're going to see less transportation service hours than you will see discussion hours. But the case manager does spend quite a bit of time transporting clients if they need to the hospital, to the DMV, and to view some housing units. So, but it does take time. So if you calculate, having a discussion with somebody may take an hour, but transporting someone is half a day.
Yeah, I guess I just wondered a little bit more about like if there are other specific needs besides housing and what was outlined here. But again, with affordable housing, it's tough because it's like at some point, what can we even do? So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, I just wanted to point out about, there is an item here about transportation to the showers, and it says Albany or MSC. And I've been volunteering at the showers. I missed like a 6-month period when I was ill, but I've never seen Robbie bring anyone to the showers. What we started doing was getting phone numbers of the clients of the showers that have cars and asking them to pick other people up. The mama bear, for example, who's in a wheelchair, can't. So one of the clients of the showers actually has picked her up and brought her to the shower. And I mean, can we call Robbie and ask her to do that? Because I see it's on the list of her job responsibilities. So what I want to know is, can I have can I have Robbie's number so we could call her about?
You can always call Robbie. She
Okay.
has her outreach phone number, so you can always
Okay.
call her.
All right.
And if she's available, if the person is an Albany client, in need of coming to the shower, and if she's available, she could do it. That's something
Okay,
that she could
all right. So
provide.
I will go ahead and
Yeah.
do that then.
And moving forward, for the next contract, because now we're talking about the next year's contract, is what I'm suggesting is for Robbie to have more of a presence in Albany and do more visible outreach. Come to the shower program, come to the drop-in, have be at the drop-in hours.
She
of
was
the
there one
resource
time.
center.
I want to clarify
Yes.
that. I don't want to say she was never there. She was there, that I saw her.
But as as our programs become more visible, and so I feel like, she should be at those programs to be able to meet with people who come and have questions and want information. So moving forward, I will put that in the contract.
That would be great.
Yes.
Because there's new people that need help, so that would be wonderful if she were there.
Yes, yes,
Were
yes.
the target numbers on the last page, is that quarterly? A quarterly target or
No, yearly.
yearly target? Okay.
So I'm kind of stuck on this housing. I mean, there's a lot of really rich people in the Bay Area. And then we have people living in little,
Sheds.
sheds, yeah, and tents. And there's a disconnect there somewhere.
But do you have any specific suggestions or recommendation for the next year's contract that BFHB, that we could implement as part of BFHB's contract? Because housing is not like one of them, right? Like we can't ask BFHB to put tiny homes in Albany. So, but if there's anything like as far as like for instance, a shower program, I know it's been a request, so we will include that in next year's contract. If there's anything else you can,
How much housing finding does BFHP do in Albany?
what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, for example, the city is promoting second units, and, those things being available for housing. Does BFHP reach out to people who might have potential housing to see whether they'd be interested?
No, I don't think that connection's been made.
So if the problem is there's no housing, maybe there is some housing, but it's not known to.
Well, again, I think with the, because we're creating, more of a, with the drop-in center, with the resource center,
Yeah.
I think there's going to be more visibility, and we're going to implement monthly meetings of the staff involved at the at the resource center, and Robbie's going to be part of that. So there's going to be more sharing of information and coordination. So perhaps that's something that, and other things will come out of those discussions and meetings.
Yeah, but
That will help to, create those connections.
But one of the things I know that BFHP does is they go out and talk to potential landlords. They develop relationships with landlords over
Yes.
time.
Yes.
And I don't think that's happening as much in Albany as it is in other communities. And I think that it's not impossible
Yeah.
that there might be
You
some
mean
housing.
talking to landlords in Albany? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, talking to
And if
landlords.
you know
and-
of any landlords who are willing
these fellas.
and willing to talk to BFHB about potentially
guys.
housing somebody who has been homeless,
Yeah, that, and as I say, if the city is permitting second units, I wonder if the city is keeping track of who's building such things, or where those exist, and whether it could be presented to people as an option, that they might, get a subsidy. It raises an interesting issue, doesn't it? Because the idea that those units will actually be available for rent is questionable anyway, because a lot of them get built as in-law units. And so whether that really increases the housing stock or not.
Or it moves grandma to the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people are doing that now. They're having their children move in because the children are living there anyway. And, and they're moving to a second unit. But anyway, I just think I'd like to see them doing work in Albany to find out what availability of housing there might be.
So I'm getting a little confused here. There's some potential for additional units to be added, but there's no money. Is there money or isn't there money? I don't get it. Or is the problem is there's not housing, there's money, but there's no housing?
Right.
Oh, okay, so we do have the money for the subsidies. Where's that
Oh,
money?
subsidies, yes.
Where is that money coming from?
Well, so the council authorized 15,000 in subsidies, housing subsidies for this fiscal year. And we will be going to the council with the next year's budget in June and asking for a similar amount. The city also was awarded a $25,000 immediate impact grant from the county for housing subsidies. So I'm currently working on the contract with BFHP, with the county for BFHP to administer.
And when I was volunteering last month at the Resource Center, Robbie came in and announced that she had some money for housing.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe that was what she was talking about, that money that you just
No,
got.
it's probably something else. I think there's other county funding that's been made
Okay.
available.
So she did,
Yeah.
she talked to
For the
Judy about it.
region.
Yes, right.
Yes.
And do we have, like, something that explains or describes what is allowed? You know, like specifications for the housing, size or?
Well, I can bring that at the next, we don't have any specific, but it has to be something that somebody can afford over time. So the county just adopted some rapid rehousing policies, and I'm happy to bring those. They were just implemented, so I can bring those at the next meeting for you to
That'd be
see.
great. Right.
Yeah, I think the connection with the Resource Center would definitely be valuable. And actually, I was going to bring that up and ask if there were any updates on the progress of how the Resource Center was going. I don't know if you know anything.
Well, it's
new,
not on the
but-
agenda right now, but I can provide an update
for
next
next
We
meeting.
can put it on the next agenda. Okay.
And the position will be in the budget?
It's being requested.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Public? Okay.
Yes, Peter Campbell, Albany resident. I'm glad to hear that there's so many programs around that are making an attempt to make a little dent in the housing situation. And it just epitomizes, or it just points out the fact that this is not Albany. This is regional, it's Bay Area, it's statewide, it's actually nationwide, perhaps even worldwide, I don't know, that there are these housing issues. I mean, you said that the city has a certain amount of money from the county or wherever, and that it's not enough because housing is so expensive. I agree, housing is expensive here because everybody wants to live here. So that's all I wanted to say on that. Bart, Mr. Grossman, I wanted to thank you for saying that the problem is a shortage of housing. That's what I've been saying. It's what a lot of us have been saying for a long time. How we solve that problem, I don't know. It's up to the council to figure that out. But that's the real problem. There's not enough housing. Nothing you can do in terms of controlling or conversation or rent review panels or rent control or housing subsidies, that's not going to create more housing. The only thing that's going to create more housing is getting developers willing to do it, encouraging the developers to build more housing, and making it a favorable climate for that development. More housing will go work wonders in solving a lot of these problems. There are problems that exist. I won't deny that. How do you solve them? I think your comment about insufficient quantities of housing is right on the mark. We need to deal with that issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Francesco?
Thank you. I'd like to know more information, and you can, about what the city is doing with the funds that were voted to build affordable housing.
With the A1 fund?
Yeah. I understand that there was some, session, closed session, and Isabel, do you know when the results of that closed session regarding that might become available to the public to understand any progress?
No, I don't.
That's too bad, because I thought that the site, would be a really good site there that was proposed, and I just remember as a kid, my father was very active in the city of Watertown, Massachusetts, where I grew up, and he was a selectman, and we had senior housing. There was a development there that was just, I remember him working and helping to get my aunt, who was a widow, to unlimited income, to get in and apply for and obtain the senior housing that was paid for, built by the public, by everybody, because that's what I'm for. Affordable housing in which everyone contributes towards it, and I'm willing to pay my fair share to that. And number two, that the housing is, affordable housing is as a needs basis. You need it, you show that you need it, and then we help you with the subsidized housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, does the commission have any more comments? Okay. So our next item is soda tax.
Okay, I passed out, did you get it? Did you pass it on to us? I have 2 extra copies of this memo that I prepared for the city council on the sugar sweetened. So this came from the last meeting where we talked about these particular issues, making sure the water bottle filling stations are wheelchair accessible, that the physical fitness programs include people of all physical capabilities, nutrition and cooking classes for all physical, nutrition, and budget needs, and then to change the name to the community walking program so that it includes everyone of all capabilities. I mean, maybe it could be a community movement program or something else, but so.
Yeah, I had something to say about that.
Okay.
So originally, the program was going to be called the Community Walking Challenge. And the way that it's phrased here, it says a name change to the Community Walking Program. I don't know if you meant.
Oh, for it is what I meant.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
because that makes it sound like you want to change the name from Community
No.
Walking Challenge to Community Walking Program,
No,
which I don't think
I
addresses
don't.
the issue, but
Thank you
that's all I
for
had to say,
pointing
yeah.
that out, yeah. So are there any other changes
That's all I saw, but.
Looks good to
or additions? Okay, I just think it's good to
Perfectly
keep the
reasonable.
stuff
Yeah.
in mind.
Absolutely.
Does the public want to?
Sure. Public? Any comments?
Okay, so it's just the one change, Isabel. Should I send it, or do I send it to you and you send it?
Either way, if you send it to me, I'll send it to the city council.
Okay,
Or if you want to use the city council email on the city website.
I'll just send, I'm going to make the one change and then I'll send it to you. How's that? Then it'll be clean. Whatever, I'll make sure they all get it.
Okay. All right. Now, what do we want on the agenda for next time?
Well, we'll have a draft letter on the inclusivity survey.
I'd like an update on the resource center or something related to homelessness or both.
What was I going to say? We had asked Mr. Bonds to periodically update us
Yeah, that's true.
on the plans for 1A, and it's been about a year, I believe, since we've heard from him. And given Mr. Popley's request for information, this might be an appropriate time to ask for a report from him.
Archie?
I have nothing.
Okay. I'll report back on the rent review from the city council meeting.
Oh, right, yeah.
Okay. And there's that item we're talking about, housing for homeless in Albany. We're going to, not exactly sure what we need to talk about, that there's the money and there's the potential housing. There was some kind of requirements.
Oh, the rapid rehousing policy.
Rapid, is it called?
Rapid.
Rapid rehousing policy, the county rapid rehousing policy.
Okay. All right. So we can, will you provide that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I have rapid rehousing policy, A1, Measure A1, affordable housing, report from Jeff, hopefully. Draft letter on inclusivity and a report back on the rent review
Resource Center update, maybe? Yeah.
resource center update. Okay. Who's going to do that?
Well, we'll put it on the agenda if there is an update,
is,
if
yeah.
there is an
That's what I
update,
meant.
so, at the
Okay.
June meeting,
So
although,
that would be you or Bart?
Isabel. I
Isabel.
assume. Isabel.
Isabel.
Just
if there is an
anything's happened
update,
by
yes.
then,
Okay.
Yeah.
Although I doubt it because we're waiting on the city
Right.
budget.
Yeah, nothing's
Okay.
happening
Yeah.
at the moment, right?
So
Tenta-
I mean, just if.
Tentatively, draft letter of inclusivity, Bart and Tara?
And Tara, yeah.
And rapid rehousing, that's also Isabel, and I will do the rent review. Margie and I can do that. Okay. I think that's it. Night. I'm now calling the meeting to close.